Nothing in this video presentation or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
I'm Sue Becker, and my husband Brad is at the table. I'm not both of us, believe me. Together we make the Bread Beckers. Let me read a scripture before we get into the message that I'd like to present to you today. From Psalm 32, verse 8, and it says, I, the Lord, will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go, and I will counsel you with my eye upon you. I so love that verse because I feel that as a wife and a mother, as I've sought to look well to the ways of my household from Proverbs 31, that the Lord has instructed me and taught me in the way I should go, and He has counseled me with His eye upon me. I'm not here today to tell you the way you should go and what exactly you should do. I'm not here to say you need to be exactly like Brad and I and do all the things that we do. I am here to present a lot of information to you, though, and in hopes that you will take that information and the Lord then will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go with His eye upon you. I'm not a nutrition expert. I want to make that clear right up front. I'm not a financial consultant or any of these things. I am a wife and a mother. Brad and I have been married almost 22 years. We do have 7 children, and we homeschool. So, and we now have this business that we are running out of our home. But the Lord has really enlightened me in a lot of ways. I do have a degree in food science. I graduated from the University of Georgia, and I studied food microbiology there and worked as a bacteriologist for Kraft Foods for several years before we began to have children. So I have some knowledge, and this has always been an area of interest to me. I have an understanding of chemistry and organic chemistry and biochemistry, and these things fascinate me. In fact, Brad loves to say, oh, Sue's idea of a good time is curling up with a biochemistry book, and it is very fascinating to me. And as we were first introduced to the whole idea of milling our own wheat and making our own bread about 7 years ago through some medical journals put out by Bill Gothard, an offshoot of his ministry, the Basic Care Bulletins. I think I have. This was the one that introduced us to the idea of milling our wheat. It's called How to Greatly Reduce the Risk of Common Diseases. In this little journal, this medical journal, it discussed the history of white flour and how it came to be, and then it went through the common diseases that plague this country and tell you how white flour is directly related and how the relinquishing of our God-given responsibilities of providing the food and preparing food for our family has caused many of these diseases that plague this nation. And that's the information that I want to share with you today. Brad bought, through reading this journal, we became convicted and we bought a grain mill, and we brought the mill into our home. We really did not change too many other things about our diet. We just began to mill all our own wheat and make all of our bread products, pancakes, muffins, and bread out of this fresh milled wheat. But I wasn't expecting what happened. I noticed immediate health benefits, immediate. Constipation was relieved immediately. This is a topic that sometimes causes some embarrassment. You don't like to talk about it, but is a very real problem, as we're going to discuss in greater detail later. My energy levels were boosted. You know, you get rid of constipation, and that'll do a lot of things for you because, you know, you go 3 or 4 days without eliminating, you begin to be very sluggish, very irritable, lethargic, your headaches. So these things were things I noticed very, very quickly. My energy levels were boosted. My headaches were gone. I noticed that my dependence on antihistamines was eliminated. I'm going to explain all these as we go through this. My sugar cravings were greatly diminished. The first monthly cycle that came and went, and I didn't crave chocolate chip cookies, I thought something very different had happened to me. Ladies, you probably all know what I'm talking about. One of our children's warts disappeared in about a month after the meal came into our house. And I'm going to explain all these things and how it relates. We became very excited. Not only did I was very excited about the health benefits that I had seen, but the bread was great. It tasted great. If you have not tasted anything at our table, please come by our table. But I had been making my own bread for a while, but just out of white flour. Or, when I wanted to get healthy, I'd buy the Pillsbury whole wheat flour from the store. But the whole wheat flour in the store produced a very dry, gritty, grainy product. I mean, you could never have made a cake or muffins like what we're making out of all whole wheat. You had to cut it with some white flour. So I was very amazed when we began to mill our own wheat that I did not have to put any white flour in it, and it just tasted great and felt, had a really nice texture. So we began to share our bread and share our testimony, and I was just excited. This stuff tasted great, and I felt wonderful. So through our excitement, this led to us starting our own business because gradually other people became very interested. And in fact, they wanted to buy our bread at first. So my children and I began a little cottage industry of making our own bread and making bread to sell to other people. And other people noticed the same thing. So they would come back to us after, several weeks of buying bread and eating our bread. They would go, tell me about this mill. I want to start have it in my home where I can make muffins and pancakes and have the flour there fresh milled. And let me just say this too, over the years being a food scientist, I had studied nutrition and some health. Not a dietitian, I am more the science field, but I had some physical problems, and I began to be interested, knowing the biochemistry, that something had to be lacking in my diet. So I have studied things all over the years before we began to mill our wheat. And I did brewer's yeast, and I took all kinds of vitamins and supplements over the years, and other things that you probably have tried, and nothing that I tried in the health food, industry, did I see significant enough benefits to keep me doing it. This is what so opened my eyes about changing just to milling our own wheat and making our own bread. And the first 2 or 3 years, we changed nothing else about the way we ate. We still ate. Now, we ate pretty good, and we ate normal meals. We weren't junky eaters anyway. But, we didn't cut out this and cut out this. We just put the bread. Everywhere we ate, there was muffins or pancakes or bread or rolls or pizza. It was now made with this dough. So this was very enlightening to me, and I'm here to tell you today, none of the things that I did years ago from the health food industry am I still doing today. But the bread, I grow more and more excited about it as the years go on. We've now been doing this for about 7 years, milling our wheat, making our own bread. So anyway, getting back to my story, our testimony a little bit here, as people began to feel better too, they were asking about, well, hey, tell me how I can get one of these mills. And I was giving them Magic Mill's name and address and said, well, here, call this. This is where we got ours. Well, after about the fourth person that asked me, I began to think, maybe I'm not, maybe this is the business that we're supposed to have in our home, not the selling of the bread. In fact, at this point, I was pregnant with my 6th child, and I was actually becoming very weary of trying to make bread for other people and make my family all our bread for our family. And I'll never forget this day. I met Brad in the driveway as he drove in from work, and I was very tired, and I had been making bread all day long for other people and for us. And I just looked down and said, Brad, I had a thought. I said, I don't think that I'm supposed to be making bread for the world. I think maybe I'm supposed to teach the world how to make bread for themselves. And little did I know the significant spiritual truth here, and I'm going to share some more in just a little bit about this. But also, sometimes we say things that we don't know the extent of the meaning. But about 2 years ago, Brad and I wrote an article for a magazine, Above Rubies, and it's been published, and it comes out of Australia and New Zealand, and it literally goes all over the world. And Brad and I now have machines and have taught people. I've talked to New Zealand on the phone, walked them through the steps of making bread, talked to Taiwan. We have mills now in every country in the world, in every continent, not every country, in every continent, with the exception of Antarctica. There's nothing there yet. But it's very fascinating that I didn't know this truth. So that is that was God and what He was going to do with our business. So we began our business just in 1992, November of 1992, just before the presidential election. with the prep, we were very excited. We began it as a business. Brad wanted to come home from work. He was in the construction field. He wanted a food business. All our years thinking about other businesses that we could do, because he always said, I want a food-related business, because if there's ever a recession or depression in this country, and this was 15 years ago, he said, if there's ever a recession or depression in this country, a food-related business, a food business can endure it. It's the only one that can. Construction will be the first and the hardest hit. He said, so I got to find something to bring me home and get me out of that industry. Well, with the presidential election, the results of that election, you remember that, 1992? Wasn't quite. It was very rude awakening, I think, for God's people as we sat there and watched those results of that election come in. And I don't know about you, but that very night I went to bed very humbled, very sobered, not really fearful, actually almost at peace, realizing that I think we all knew from that election what God had to do to our nation. Up until that point, you were like, are we going to be Nineveh, and a revival's going to sweep, and we're all going to repent, and Jonah's going to come, we're going to fall over, or is God going to have to send his judgment? And I think that night we all sat there and went, God is going to have to send his judgment. Well, I'm an early riser, and I rose early the next morning. And I was praying, had a lot of things on my mind. And as I began to read that morning, everywhere I turned seemed to talk about grain. And it seemed to talk about God watering the dry and parched land and bringing forth the grain to feed his people during the famine. Joseph seemed to pop up everywhere, and I wasn't in the book of Genesis. I was in Psalms, but it talked about how Joseph fed God's people and supplied them with the food that they needed during the famine because he was obedient to do what God said. And through my reading that morning, I became more and more excited, and God gave me a vision. I didn't see anything, but God began to speak to my heart that he was raising Brad up through our business to be a Joseph to his people, and that he wanted us to begin to prepare by storing grain, which is storable. It's a storable food, and it's storable because, and this is the difference in storable food, there's a lot of food out there that is storable. It won't spoil, but it's dead already. That's why it won't spoil. But grains, see, are just as nutritious today as they are 10 years from now. So God began 20 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now. In fact, they've unearthed tombs in Egypt, and they found kernels of grain in those tombs, 4,000-year-old tombs, and when they planted it, it sprouted. See, it was still alive. It's amazing. All the life of that plant is in that seed, and that's what God told Joseph to store because of the famine that was coming, because it can sustain your life. No other food that you can store really can sustain your life like the grains can. So this was the message that God began to lay on our heart, that he wanted us to begin to store grains to prepare now during the fat years for the lean years that were ahead for our nation. So, and as God is so good to confirm, when he shows you something, he did just that. The following week, we got my son's Sunday school lesson, and Brad was helping him with it for 3 or 4 weeks. They were reading the Bible and answering questions. Guess what it was? The story of Joseph. December of that year, we get a newsletter from David Wilkerson, and it was entitled The Joseph Company. And this was his prophetic message to God's people in 1992, December of 1992. The Joseph Company, he was saying that God is beginning to work and prepare and raise up Josephs during these days to prepare in all sorts of realms and areas of life so that they will be able to supply his people with their needs and their not their wants, but their needs during the hard, difficult years of judgment that were going to have to come to our nation. I thought that was very exciting to see that this was not something we had read about before. This whole concept of storing the grains and being Josephs wasn't something we had read somewhere and went, oh, wow, yeah, God is so good to work that way. He speaks to your heart. Then he lets all this information just flood. Everywhere we turn, it seemed to come. In April of the following year, Brad took the vision to heart, and he came home from work one day and he said, Sue, I've been thinking, we've got some money in the savings. I want to take that money out of savings and invest it in wheat. He said, it's not doing us any good. Interest rates had kind of bottomed out at that point. So to make a long story short, we ordered 10,000 pounds of wheat. It showed up at our house. one day, and we paid for it, unloaded it, put it all in our storage facility. And I was excited, had the vision, the confirmations, we were ready to go with this thing. The only problem is, ladies, does this ever happen to you, how the enemy comes to you in the night, and speaks these little things? And next morning I woke up and I had had a restless night, and all of a sudden I was just thought we were off the wall. We had no money now. And Brad was in the construction field, so we had always saved during the times when he had a lot of work going on, because sometimes, he'd finish up a job, he'd complete a building, and he'd be, between jobs would sometimes be a week or two without work. So we had always saved. Well, now our little cushion was gone. We had all this wheat, but I don't think the bank would take the wheat for a house payment, do you? But anyway, so I began to really kind of be stressful. And as I always begin my day with a quiet time with the Lord, usually I kind of unload my cares on Him, and then I just go through my daily Bible reading. And I have several little things that I read from, and then I read certain areas of the Bible. But this particular morning, I just cried out to the Lord, "Oh, Lord, are you sure we're doing the right thing? Are we getting deceived? Are we getting off the track here? Is this really your message to us?" And I received this little calendar from David Wilkerson, and I usually start my day with just seeing what my verse for the day is. I would like to read to you my verse for that morning. Proverbs 11:26. Actually, it was a couple of verses ahead, but I always try to read the whole chapter of wherever God sends me that day. This was the verse, Proverbs 11, verse 26. "The people will curse him who holds back grain when the public needs it, but a blessing from God and man is upon the head of him who sells it." Needless to say, I did not fret too much longer. I jumped out of my seat, and I was just so excited that God had once again confirmed. And after this last confirmation, God really, Brad and I both sensed an urgency to get out and share this idea of storing grains and storing food and preparing during these hard and difficult times. During these fat years, start preparing for the hard years that were coming. We began to sense that it was our responsibility, and God was calling us to share this with His people. Not so much to say, you need to be storing grain, but to say, maybe you're a Joseph, that God's already been stirring this up, and maybe our message is the confirmation for you. But, and the whole idea then of the grain mill, where that fits in, is that you got to have some way to use this grain now. And so that's how it kind of fit into our business and what God was doing. We did not want to share this message to instill fear in God's people. Joseph did not store grain because he was afraid or fearful of the famine that was ahead. He stored grain because God showed him what was coming and told him to do this. And that's exactly what Brad and I are doing. And that's why I'm saying, I'm not here to tell you, you got to do this thing and go out and do this, or you might starve. Man does not live by bread alone, okay? Don't think that. He lives by every word that goes forth from the mouth of God. But like I said in the beginning, Psalm 32, verse 8, God says, "I, the Lord, will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go." I'm going to present a lot of information. You take and you glean and let God instruct you and teach you what is for you and what might not be. But as we went out and began to share this message, we began to notice several things that I began to become aware as I began to share the information from the medical journal, the common diseases. I also began to share that with people, that people are sick. God's people are sick and we're dying. And that sickness is just running rampant. And that's when I began to really start studying and finding out just how nutritional and how these health benefits that I saw, how was this bread so effective in bringing these about. So that's some of the information that I want to share. As people then began to changing to milling their own wheat, making their own bread, and they came back to me and said, "My cholesterol lowered 85 points in 1 month. It has to be the bread. That's all I changed." I began to go, what is going on here? What's in this bread? So that's what I want to share. I want to share a scripture with you, though, that the Lord kind of laid on my heart. And it's Matthew 9, verse 35. And here's what it says. It's a familiar scripture, or part of it is. 35 begins like this. It says, "And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, and teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming the good news of the gospel of the kingdom, and curing all kinds of diseases and every weakness and infirmity." And that's what Brad and I feel like. We're traveling all around, all the cities, and we're not curing, but we're teaching. But listen to what happened to Jesus. It says, when he saw the throngs. some Bibles say the multitude. See, he saw the multitudes that were sick. He was moved with pity and sympathy for them. And I believe that's exactly where God's heart is today. He's looking down, He's looking at us, and He's seeing the multitudes of His people that are sick and they're dying. And He has been moved with pity and sympathy because He has the answer. But listen to this. It says He was moved with pity and sympathy for them because they were bewildered, harassed, distressed, and dejected and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And what Brad and I saw through all this, as we went about and we saw God's people sick, the world's sick, not just God's people, that how we were going to the medical experts, see, and we were coming away no better off. They weren't really able to help us. They don't have the answers. And we were, or even worse, we were coming away with side effects then, complications from the very medication they were giving us to take care of this problem. So then God's people were going out now to alternative medicines now, to herbs and to other things, natural health foods. And then you go out there and you hear all this conflicting stuff. This one says eat meat, and this one says doesn't eat meat. This one says eat dairy, and this one says don't eat dairy. This one says eat big breakfast. This one says eat little breakfast, and don't eat anything till after 12 o'clock, and eat your big, and you sit there and you become more confused and aligned, harassed, distressed, bewildered, and helpless, dejected like sheep without a shepherd. What's a sheep without a shepherd? A sheep without a shepherd is a sheep that doesn't know what to do, that doesn't know where to go. And I'm telling you, God sees all this, and He has been moved with pity. But do you know what Jesus said? He says, the harvest is indeed plentiful. This is all across the nation. The harvest is plentiful. This is happening everywhere. He said, but the laborers are few. So pray to the Lord of the harvest to thrust out laborers into the harvest field. The laborers are few that are going to tell you what I'm going to tell you today. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I believe God has shown this and has equipped Brad and I and literally thrust us out in the harvest field. I'll tell you, that day back in November when we started our business, this is not what we sat down and said, okay, we're going to start doing workshops and seminars all over the Southeast. That was not. God has literally thrust us out here. The laborers are few that are going to tell you what Dr. Russell will tell you in this book. In fact, it grieves me to no end that I get calls all the time from customers and go, I was in such and such health food store, and they've never even heard of the idea of milling your own wheat. The very health food stores that, are supposed to be out there promoting health have never even heard of this. But God has, because He says, give us this day our daily bread. See, He knew all about this. So now He is literally thrusting out laborers that will tell you the benefits and the truth of eating this way. I want to tell you a little story that I think is just such a classic example of being harassed, distressed, bewildered, dejected, and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. It's almost a humorous story, but I think it will just make it very plain to you. When my 17-year-old daughter was 3 years old, she began to get warts on her hands. I took her to the doctor, and he said, it's a viral infection. The warts are a manifestation of a viral infection. It'll run its course, and they'll go away. No problem. You don't really need to do anything about it. I thought, great. That's the first time a doctor told me that. You don't need to do anything about it. So we went home and just proceeded to not do anything about it. The only problem was 3 years later, Ashley's 6 years old. She has the warts still, and they've spread and they've grown, and she has a huge one now on her heel that is so large it's becoming impossible for her to wear shoes without it bleeding and just really hurting. Not to mention the fact that now my 3-year-old son, my second son, they were 3 years apart, is now getting these warts. They're a viral infection, and the virus is actually contagious. You don't get the warts from touching them, but you get the virus, just like you get chicken pox or anything else. So this became a problem. I couldn't just do nothing now and let it run its course. So I took her back to the doctor, and he sent us to a specialist, I thought, to have the warts removed. I thought they'd just go in and cut them out with a knife or whatever. So we go to the doctor, and he gives me this little bottle of acid and says, drip this on her warts, just drop it on each one, and what the acid will do, you do it several times a day for 1 or 2 weeks, I don't remember, and the acid will kill the skin around the wart, and the warts will fall off. Great, okay, $50, thank you very much. So we go home with our bottle of acid. Well, I begin to drip this acid on all her warts. It just burns, sets her skin on fire. This little 6-year-old tender skin, this acid is a problem. So I thought, this is not going to work. I mean, she's screaming. Can you imagine getting acid on your 6-year-old screaming? So I thought, well, we just won't do this. And we were supposed to be going back a week or two, whatever it was, go back. And I thought, he'll just cut the warts out. We'll just tell him this didn't work. Well, no. So he scrapes with a scalpel. No, your skin's not dead. You really need to get this acid on. I said, well, it burned her skin. Well, here. It gives me this little adhesive pads to put to protect her skin around the warts, that was a trip. $50, thank you very much. Come back in a week. Really get this acid on there, and that'll take care of the problem. So we go home again, and we attempt to do this, only this time the acid seeps under the adhesive, and now we have, heat-producing situation here. She's really frantic. We go back this time again thinking, surely, this time we're just going to cut these warts off. I don't know where our mind goes when we go to doctors, and we, do you notice? And now I look back and go, why did I go back? So this time he says, put Vaseline all around the area, and that'll protect it. So we go home, and I do this, another $50. I'm out $100. We still got warts. We got our bottle of acid, So then we tried. That did not work. It was the same old thing. The acid still just seemed to get on her skin. So we went back. She was screaming. I'm trying to drag her out the door now. It was one of those scenes where you go, that lady just needs to just spank that kid, It was one of those grocery store scenes that we've all seen, and we did not want to be that person, but I was. So, they take her in, and I'm like, look, this is not working. He said, I think you're right. I guess it's time to cut these off. But only she was frantic. He wasn't coming near her. So he goes out, gets his assistant, brings the papoose. They're going to hog-tie my child, and they're going to anesthetize her. They're going to put her to sleep to do this because now she's so frantic, he can't even get near her. She's wailing, And I really finally, I came to my senses, and I went, no, I just can't handle this today. I think we'll just maybe go home, come back another day. Well, I went home, and I guess, I remembered during my years before I had children of my reading nutritional things. I was infertile. I didn't have monthly cycles, and we wanted children. First 5 years of our marriage, it didn't matter. I didn't care if I had a monthly cycle or not. But when you want to have babies, it becomes a problem. So I had studied nutritionally how I could help. And in my reading, I read about vitamin E being significantly important for a woman's reproductive cycle and regulating her monthly cycles. So I began to take vitamin E, and just in a month or two, I began to have normal monthly cycles. But in my reading back then, I remembered reading somewhere in that about vitamin E and warts. So I got out my old little book that I had read, and sure enough, there it was about vitamin E being very effective in helping to get rid of warts. So I began to give Ashley supplements of vitamin E and my 3-year-old son, Caleb, who was just starting to get the warts. In 1 week of vitamin E supplements, Caleb's warts were gone. It took about 3 weeks for Ashley's to totally disappear. Vitamin E supplements. I was ecstatic. I just praise the Lord. Thank you. Well, my third child, who was a baby during all this, I guess he got the virus in him. But something about their little immune systems at 3 years old, 3 years old, Joshua begins to get warts. Unfortunately for Joshua, he couldn't swallow capsules very well. And also, I guess for him, well, he was only 3. I was now pregnant with my 5th child. We had 3 little babies real close together there. So I didn't do real well in giving him his supplements. So the years went on. He became 5 years old. The warts had spread and grown, and he had one so bad that it was fixing to push one of his fingernails off. But it was at this point, when Joshua was 5 years old, that the mill came into our house. And see, wheat is the richest source of vitamin E that there is, but it has to be fresh milled, because once the grains are milled, the nutrients begin to oxidize, which I'm going to cover more thoroughly in just a minute. The mill came into our home. I wasn't thinking about all this. Like I said, I was pregnant with the 5th. I was just trying to get the bread on the table. But, or actually, I think I had my 5th at that point when the bread came into our home. But Joshua, we began to just eat the bread. Like I said, we changed nothing else about our diet. 1 month after that meal coming into our home, I looked down at Joshua's hands, and his warts were all gone. And we have not had warts since, with the exception of David up there. Every now and then he gets a little wart on his elbow. Actually, and that was only just a couple of years ago. I came home from a class one day, and he goes, oh, and I just told the class we haven't had warts since. He goes, oh, Mom, look at this. I got a little wart. And I went, oh, no, I just lied to our class. But you know what? It's there a week or two, it runs its course, and it goes away. And he's had that, 2 or 3 times you've had that little wart come up, and then it just goes away. But that's what your bodies are supposed to be doing. Our immune systems are supposed to be strong enough to fight that little viral infection, and it should run its course and go away. But we're not. See, we're living with warts. So do you see, I was helpless, dejected, bewildered, harassed, distressed, like a sheep without a shepherd over warts. My daughter had to wear shoes. We needed to get the warts off, but God had the answer. I took the wart. I used to tell people, the bread made the warts go away. Well, I kind of got ridiculed a little bit. Somebody said, all your other information is so medically sound, but the wart stuff sounds a little hokey. So I kind of got intimidated, and I took it out until I met a lady 2 years ago in Nashville, Tennessee, and she came up to my table, and she said, I've got to tell you this story. She said, my really close friend had a huge wart on her thumb. She said, Sue, it was so big, it was like a second appendage. She said she had gone to doctor after doctor to see what they could do to get rid of this wart, and to no avail. She finally came to my husband as a friend who is a doctor, and she asked him, was there anything he could think of that she could do? And he said, no, I don't know of anything. He said, if you tried to cut that wart off, you would have to amputate your thumb. It was so huge of a growth. She said, she had heard my tape, and she said, Sue, I had these 2 loaves of bread sitting there that I had just made. She had just begun to mill her own wheat and make her own bread. And she said, I looked at my friend and I said, I heard this lady on a tape. She said, I haven't even met her, but I heard her testimony of how it got rid of her son's warts. And she said, would you like to try my bread? Now tell me, would you turn down a homemade loaf of bread? Neither would I, warts or not, So she said, sure, So she takes home the 2 loaves of bread, and she said, Sue, she called me before she finished the first loaf of bread. The wart was already going away. And by the time she finished the second loaf of bread, the wart was gone. Isn't that a neat testimony? I wish I could tell you how many people tell me that their warts go away when they start milling their own bread, milling their own wheat, making their own bread. Now, that's not a life-threatening situation. That's not terminal cancer. That's not heart disease. That's not some of the other things that we have to deal with. Nonetheless, it's a very common problem in this country, warts. She went to the doctor. She went to the experts. They didn't know anything to do for her, but God had the answer. His perfect provision of food that He gave to us to eat took care of the problem. Isn't that a fascinating story? Harassed, distressed, bewildered, dejected. This lady just wanted this wart off of her thumb and couldn't get it. Harassed, distressed, bewildered, dejected, like sheep without a shepherd. Well, why are the grains and beans so nutritious? Think about this with me for just a minute. They are the only food that we eat that is the seed of the plant as well as the fruit. See, think about that. Have you ever really thought about that? All the life-giving nutrients, everything to make that grow into a tree or a plant or to produce the fruit is right there in that seed, and that's what you're eating. Oh yes, fruits and vegetables are very nutritious, but they're the fruit of the plant, and they spoil. See, God designed the grains and the beans to perfectly store the nutrients within. Here's your seed, and this hard outer coating, outer surface here is the bran. And it's a hard outer shell that stores and protects those nutrients that are within here, and down in here is the germ, is the life of the plant. It protects those nutrients from being destroyed so that when you go to plant that seed, then it will be able to grow. So that's why your grains and beans are so nutritious. But what happens when you break these seeds open, like in the milling process, when you mill wheat into flour, and once you break it open, then you've broken open that protective layer, that protective coating, and those nutrients then are exposed to the air. They begin to oxidize. Oxygen begins to use those nutrients and destroys them. And in the first day alone, just from milling and breaking that kernel of wheat open, you lose as much as 45%. By the third day, just 72 hours later, you've lost as much as 90% of the nutrients that were there. Now, the fiber goes nowhere, and the protein is not destroyed, but the vitamins. Vitamin E being the most significantly one that is destroyed the most quickly. And if I don't get to the vitamin E information, it is in this brochure here. It's very fascinating. That is vitamin E's job, and so it's going to be oxidized the most quickly. This was common knowledge, and oxidation is a common thing. It's perfectly understood. When people say, do you have any thing that can substantiate what you're saying here. Well, I read it in here and I've read it in other places, but oxidation, you know it happens. What turns your bananas and your apples dark? That's oxidation. What causes oils to go rancid? That's oxidation. You just never thought about it doing it to your flour and your nutrients, okay? So that's the same process. Well, prior to the 1900s, this was common knowledge. They knew the flour spoiled. So the wheat was milled locally and the bread was baked at home. You had your local millers and you went down there and you got your flour and you went home and you baked your bread. But in the early 1900s, around 1920, they discovered that if they sifted the bran and the germ, which has all the oil in it, if they sifted this away, these parts away, they were left with the white flour, which is the endosperm that's in here, that the flour would spoil. So they invented these huge steel rolling mills that would sift the bran and germ away and produce huge volumes of this new long-lasting white flour. This revolutionized our country. The millers moved away from the towns, the local towns, and moved out to the wheat fields. And because this new white flour could now be shipped all over the country, and the bread didn't have to be baked on a regular basis. However, something happened that they were not expecting. Two diseases became almost epidemic at the time. Beriberi, which is a vitamin B1 deficiency, which is nervous disorder. Pellagra, which is a nicotinic acid deficiency, which is a GI disturbance. These became almost epidemic, and the health officials, I assume government officials, this puzzled them. They could not figure out what was going on. But do you know what? They themselves traced the problem directly back to the new white flour that was now being produced by the mills. They went to the millers and they urged them. They urged them to put the bran and the germ back in the flour. But you know what? They had found a market for these byproducts of the milling process. They were now selling the bran and germ as cattle feed. So they were not willing to give up their cattle feed market and start putting that back in the flour and having to sell it for the same price. I mean, they had a very lucrative business going on here. So what they did at this point, they chose to do something that you've all heard of the term now, enrich or fortify. You've heard of enriched white flour? Well, to me, when I read the words enriched or fortify, that means you take a superior product, a strong something, and you make it even better. You give it more than was there. That is not what they're doing to our bread. For the 25 to 30 vitamins that are removed by taking away the bran and the germ, they put 4 back in. The 4 that are necessary to prevent beriberi and pellagra. Let me just tell you this. You know, I told you we had an article published in a magazine. I got a letter from a lady in New Zealand. And she wanted to check out. She wanted to confirm what I had been saying. And there's mills over there because they grow wheat in that country. And she went down to the local miller and she started asking them all kinds of questions. And she said, by the way, she said, what do you do with the bran and germ that is sifted away? She said, we sell it as cattle feed. She was like, really? I mean, she was just like, this really is real. He said, yes. And she said, well, let me ask you a question. She said, what would happen if you fed the bran and germ to the people and the white flour to the cattle? She said, Sue, he looked at me, and without batting an eye, he went, well, they would die.
Oh, boy.
They would die. He knew the cows, not the people. The cattle would die if they did that. And she was just amazed at his own testimony out of his own mouth. She also asked him, she said, is there any vitamin E in this flour once it's milled? And he said, no. He said, we had it tested and it's all gone. He said, we do put some back in, but that's in the whole wheat flour. So it does oxidize. But this new fortifying or enriching of the white flour took care of beriberi and pellagra, supposedly. But I want to ask you something. Beriberi is the nervous disorder. Now you tell me, has it gotten rid of beriberi? Quit twitching back there. I have one in every class. Has it really? Think of all the nervous disorders in our country today. I mean, go to the public school. They got a label, labels, sheets of labels. And pellagra is a GI disturbance, and it can involve skin eruptions, skin problems. What about all the spastic colon, irritable bowel syndrome, diverticulitis? What about all these GI disturbances? And what about all the psoriasis and the seborrhea and the eczema and all these skin problems? I'm here to tell you, we've got customers totally healed of psoriasis, and all they changed was the bread. It has to do with being able to metabolize the fats and oils so that your skin can utilize that. So I'm here to say, they think that they took care of the problems of beriberi and pellagra, but did they really? But not only that, we now have a host of diseases that are directly related to this new white flour that came on our market. It's taken us a while for us to see the consequences. And if the enriching and the sifting and all this was not enough, they began to bleach the flour. And for 25 years, a product known as nitrogen trichloride was used to make this white loaf of bread, this white flour. There was a British study done on nitrogen trichloride where they fed a group of dogs a diet of white flour for 2 weeks. It was a very short article, and it didn't elaborate much, but it said at the end of 2 weeks on this white flour, the dogs had, quote unquote, the running fits. Yeah. The running fits. And it said so severe that some of them died. When I read that article, I just went, oh, Lord, is this the scourge of ADD and hyperactivity that we're seeing in our country today? And I think other things play a lot, but chlorine is being used to bleach the flour products, and so much of the food that we're eating has this nitrogen trichloride, actually has been taken off the market, but a chlorine derivative is still being used. I had a customer that came into my home tell me that her child had just been diagnosed with ADD. You know what the doctor told her? He said, get him out of the swimming pool. Chlorine is one of the worst offenders for ADD. Confirmed exactly what I was thinking. But if this is knowledge, why is chlorine in our water? Why is our FDA allowing it to be put in our food products to bleach our flour? And now, everything you buy out there is made with enriched, bleached white flour. It's very interesting. So these are some of the consequences that we've seen. I want to share an example with you before we go on. I want to make a little analogy with you here. Go back with me just a minute to the children of Israel. They've just been delivered from Egypt. God has parted the Red Sea and brought them into the wilderness, okay? He's fixing to take them to the land flowing with milk and honey that He promised to give them, okay? But they find themselves in a wilderness with no water and with no food. But they cry out to God. Well, they cry and whine to Moses a little bit. Moses cries out to God, and God miraculously supplies them with manna from heaven. They were to gather the manna when? Every day. What time of the day? In the morning. That's right, because it says when the sun came up, it kind of went away. The heat of the day, the manna was gone. So you had to get up early, ladies and gentlemen. You had to get up early. This was God's plan, for them to rise early and to gather their food. When were they to gather it? Every day. What happened if they tried to gather today, double portions? It would spoil. It would get worms in it. Who was to gather the manna? Who was to gather the manna? Until I read this a few years ago in Numbers, it just caught my eye. I always thought, they probably had some manna gatherers, and they went out and gathered the manna and everybody came and sat down. I don't think we really think of the children of Israel being quite the huge nation that they were and the millions of people that it was at that time. We think of them as being a group probably like what's here today, and somebody went out and gathered the manna and they all sat down and ate. It's real hard for us to conceive of the multitude of people that it was. But in the book of Numbers, it was very enlightening to me that it says each person was to gather enough for his own household and foreigners staying with them in their house. Remember what I told you prophetically back when we started our business? I had said to Brad, I don't think I'm supposed to make bread for the world, but I'm supposed to teach the world how to make bread for themselves. When I read that, I was so impressed with that. It is a God-given responsibility. With that in mind, let me say this to you. If a young, industrious, enterprising young Israelite that loved to get up early, he was a morning person, didn't mind getting up early and gathering that manna, if he could have figured out a way to keep the worms out of the manna, keep it from spoiling, would he have had a marketable product? Would he have? Sure. Wouldn't you have gladly paid that Israelite to go get your manna? And sure, we'll pay you. But whose responsibility was it? Who did God give the responsibility to? Everyone was supposed to gather enough for their own family. Can we see that that is exactly what happened in the early 1900s? Somebody figured out a way to keep the worms out of our manna, and we said, sure, have at it. We'll go off and do something else. This will free us up to do other things. Unfortunately, when we're caught in that snare and we relinquish God-given responsibilities, we lose control and we reap the consequences. And that's what we've seen in this nation. When they chose to fortify and enrich that flour instead of putting it back the way God had made it, they did not base their decision on what was best for the people and the health of the nation. They based it on what was best for their pocketbook. Do you see? And that's what happens. Why are we homeschooling? Because somewhere along the way we relinquished our God-given responsibility. During this same time of those children of Israel wandering in that wilderness, who's supposed to be teaching their family? We are. You're supposed to be teaching your children when? As you walk along the way, as you rise in the morning, as you go to bed at night. How can you teach them as you walk along the way if they're gone all the time to school? How can you do this? But somewhere along the way we relinquish. Now look at us. We've lost control. And the decisions that are being made are based on greed. But can we see that we've now paid the price? But now God is raising up and thrusting out laborers in the harvest field to say, you can get it back. There is a way. There is healthy, life-giving whole foods available if you're just willing to rise early and prepare the food for your own family. Let's talk about the common diseases that plague this nation and how they're directly related to the new white flour that came into our country. These diseases are related to the fiber mostly being sifted from the bread, but they're also related to the nutrients that are no longer there. I have to begin with no apologies and without any embarrassment with constipation. That is the root of the problem. We are the most constipated nation in the world, us in Great Britain. Isn't that wonderful? When the Olympics we're from down around Atlanta, when the Olympics were in the Atlanta area, I couldn't say this without saying, here we're all striving, the United States, to win a gold medal. We have it in one thing. We're constipated. Brad laughed one day. He said, gold medal, they make a flour, a white flour, a gold medal. But that's it. We're the most constipated nation in the world. People are spending millions and millions of dollars each year on laxatives. You told me, $30 a month, to correct this problem. And I am here to tell you, come by our table, eat a muffin, eat a piece of raisin bread. Tomorrow morning, you will not be constipated. Let me explain to you exactly what's happened, and I totally grossed somebody out yesterday, so I won't go into quite as much detail. Come to my seminar if you have one. But it's so fascinating to me when you understand exactly what that means and what is happening in your body and how fiber relates to it. It makes perfect sense. So I don't want to apologize here and do this too lightly because I want to do it justice. But what fiber does, it absorbs water. It draws water in. Your colon is shaped like this. This is the way it looks. It's shaped like it goes around like this, okay, in your body. Its function is to draw water and to regulate the amount of water coming and going from here, okay? Draws water in to soften the stools or lets it out if your stools are too soft. But fiber does that. Fiber is the ingredient that regulates it. Fiber is like a sponge, okay? It absorbs the water. But what happens to that sponge when it absorbs water? When you've done the dishes at night and you leave the sponge sitting there on the sink, tomorrow morning you wake up and it's shriveled and it's dry and it's hard. That's what America's stools are like. They're shriveled and they're dry and they're hard. And that's why you can go several days without eliminating, because these hard, dry, packed-in stools that have no bulk can just pack in here day after day, and it'll take you 3, 4, sometimes 5 days to have a bulky enough stool that you want to eliminate. But see, fiber draws the water in, and just like that sponge, it expands. You've all heard that it shortens your transit time. That's exactly what it means. It takes a lot less time to fill that up now. For some people, it's every meal. For some, it's 24 hours. It fills that up, so you have to eliminate. But what happens now, though, just like that sponge, when it absorbs that water and it expands, it's soft, though. It's not hard. So even though you've got got this bulky stool, it's very soft and easy to eliminate. Then you've got your fiber, your bran in there that God perfectly designed to be in balance, see, with the white flour. You know these all-bran cereals? One of them, a few years back, they had to take off the market because it was causing bleeding bowels. The bran is abrasive. It's like, I say, you know those sponges now with the green, scrubby stuff, rough stuff? That's your bran. See, the sponge, the soft side, is like the white flour, but the bran is the scrubby side. So now you've increased the bulk of your stool, but you've got this bran, you've got this scrubber in there that scrubs the walls of your colon clean and drags it perfectly clean and takes out everything with it. And that's the way God designed it to be. But when you do the all bran or try to add bran in places where it shouldn't be, it's too abrasive, so it scratches it up and makes it, you have bleeding bowels. So that's what's happened. That's what needs to be happening. God intended this to be thoroughly cleansed on a regular basis. Let me explain this to you too. See, this is where your transfer of nutrients takes place. Your food comes into here, and this is where your body starts sending out all the nutrients that go to every part of your body. There are receptor sites all along the walls of your colon. This might go to your kidneys. This will go to your eyes. Everywhere. This is where the nutrients go, to every part of your body. Well, you just think, if this is lined with fecal material that is not being dragged clean, how effective are you getting those nutrients in? Not to mention the fact, one of the first things I noticed when we began to do the bread is that I began to not be congested anymore. I have not had an antihistamine now in 7 years since we started milling our wheat and making our own bread. And my little Lydia, that's 5 years old, and Olivia, that's 1.5, that were both conceived and born since we started milling our wheat and making our own bread, they have never had Triminic. Never. Never had a decongestant or an antihistamine. In fact, Olivia is 15 months old and she has not been sick a day in her life. Not yet. Okay? She's cut her teeth. She's got all 4 molars, so don't say, oh, she probably hasn't cut her teeth. She's got, all of these. She's got her 4 front and 4 top, 4 bottom.
You never had any?
No congestion at all. Let me explain this to you. Now, your body, God fearfully and wonderfully made us. Your body knows what's nutrients. It recognizes those things that it needs. It knows what it needs. And it does not recognize toxins, the red dyes, the chemicals that are in our food. It dumps those into the waste station to be eliminated. The problem in America is it's not going out. It's not going out. It's not being eliminated every day. So it's sitting in here. Well, now, what did I tell you happens here? This is where your transfer of nutrients go out into your body. So these toxins, they're backing up in here. So what's happening now is they're starting to be reabsorbed back into the body. Well, let's think about this. See, this is so fascinating to me. Where is your secondary dump station? Where is the other place your body eliminates? Through your nose. When these toxins start going back into your body, you start making mucus so you can blow it out your nose. That's your body's way of getting rid of these things. So see, if your colon is dragged totally clean and these toxins are eliminated on a regular basis, you won't have this sinus buildup. Have I grossed you out?
No.
Okay.
That's a urinary tract.
Oh, no. Well, that's... Right. That's the other... that's the filter, and that's more regulated. But... Right. Did you ever think about that? But that's why. And that's why when your body is having trouble metabolizing things like allergies, allergies are coming from our body being so stressed by all these toxins just staying in that we're not eliminating it, so it's building up this mucus. And now when we go to eat something that's a little harder to metabolize, we can't do it. So that's where allergies are coming from too. Also, because these toxins are being reabsorbed into our system, it is really taxing our immune system. Can you see now that our body is just constantly in a state of trying to deal with things that it should have already dealt with? They should have been eliminated, but now the body's just having to try to deal with these things. Let me tell you this. So now our America's immune systems and our adrenal systems are very weakened, and they're very taxed by all this junk that is constantly staying in our body that God designed to eliminate and cleanse thoroughly on a regular daily basis. Our children also, none of us actually have been to the doctor in more than 5 years now for an illness, with one exception that I'll tell you about in just a minute. 5 years. It's been now 5 years since any of us have had to take an antibiotic. 5 years. Did you hear what I just said? We have 7 children, ages 17 to 1. Olivia has only been to the doctor 1 time, my baby. Okay, like I said, she has been sick. I forgot about, how could I forget? We chose, through some reading that I had done, not to immunize our 6th child, Lydia. Olivia, we haven't really had her immunized yet. Olivia contracted whooping cough. Lydia, my 6th child, who was 5 years old. She was 4 at the time. We chose not to immunize her, and there was whooping cough going around our area, and Lydia was exposed, and she got it. It is very contagious. I did not know what it was, and I was very shocked when she started coughing and gagging up mucus. Here was my child that's never had triminic or never been congested a day in her life, and here she's now coughing up to the extent that she's now beginning to throw up her food. I kept thinking it would go away, because that's the way, when she ever did get a little snotty nose, she'd wake up and go, I got a snotty nose, and by noon it would be gone. See, she would have eliminated and gotten rid of the stuff. But this kept going on and on. I took her to the doctor, and he said, she's got bronchitis from ragweed that's in bloom, and she's all congested. There again, why we kind of dummy up, and, why this didn't go, no, there's no way, But as I was going home, I went, there's no way. Lydia wouldn't get this congested from ragweed in 1 year, just like that, So I finally, we were someplace, and a lady saw her whose children had just had whooping cough. And to make a long story short, she said, that looks like whooping cough. I found a 99-year-old doctor that practices medicine about 15 minutes from our house. Her name is Dr. Lila Denmark. And she's still practicing medicine at 99 years old, and she helped develop the whooping cough vaccination. I took Lydia to see her, and she said, yes, she in fact did have whooping cough. And but she said actually that Lydia was almost over it. But she said, I think, to be on the safe side, we should treat Lydia with antibiotics, as well as Olivia, who was 6 months old, had contracted it from Lydia because she was too young to have started having her immunizations. So the 2 of them did get whooping cough in the fall. But here's what I want to tell you that was so fascinating. She went to examine Lydia, who was 4 years old. She opened her mouth, and she was looking in her throat, and this 99-year-old doctor said, wow, her tonsils are almost gone. And I said, explain, please. She explained to me that your tonsils, when a baby is born, they have no immune system. They get their immunities from your colostrum and then the mother's milk as they're nursing until their immune system kicks in around 6 months old and then gradually begins to develop until they have a strong immune system. She said, God put the tonsils in your throat. They're your first line of defense. That's a baby's immune system. That's their little weak immune system. It fights a disease. It's the initial, it's the kickstart. And then God put it in your mouth because that's where so many things come in, especially for a baby. That's what they're doing. They suck and everything comes in through their mouth. So she said that's your first line of defense, and that's a baby's first attack for anything. She said, but as their immune system begins to develop at 6 months old and then grows and gets stronger, your tonsils should atrophy and go away. No one had ever told me this before. In all my studying in school, I had never learned this. And I said, what? And she said, yes, your tonsils should atrophy and go away. And she said, hers are almost totally gone. And she began to commend me on the way I must be feeding my children. She said, I have never seen a child this young with their tonsils almost completely gone. She looked at my son David. She said, hop up here, young man. She looked at him. She goes, he was 8 years old at the time, 9 years old at the time, just turned 9. She said, his are totally gone. I couldn't believe it. They atrophy. Actually, someone just explained to me that they don't go totally away, like disappear, you don't have them. They are there, but they shrivel to an extent that you can't see them, and that if you should ever need them, then they will swell and start working again. She said they atrophy and go away. So I thought this was very interesting, because I know that when I was 17 years old in high school, they were threatening to take my tonsils out. Do you see? Our tonsils, Americans' tonsils, are trying to fight all the diseases that come into our system and our body because our immune system is so weak, it can't do its job. Now, how many of y'all have your tonsils? And I know kids that are just little young, 8 or 9 years old, having their tonsils removed already because they're so inflamed from trying to do the work of your immune system. That was very enlightening to me, and I was very impressed. But do you see how constipation is the root of it? It's at the root. The body staying filled with toxins and things that should be cleansed thoroughly from the body. Appendicitis. Did you know that an appendectomy, I believe, is still the most common abdominal surgery done in this country, and it is directly related to backed up fecal material sitting around in your body causing an infection. Diverticulitis. 1 out of 3 people now contract diverticulitis. Very common disease. Are any of y'all familiar with diverticulitis? Let me explain to you what it is. From trying to eliminate a hard stool, what happens, the walls of your colon, are elastic, just like a balloon, okay? Identical pressure. If you pretend that you're blowing up a balloon, it's the same movement when you're trying to eliminate a very hard and difficult stool. What happens then is in the wall of your colon, you blow up a little balloon there. And that's called a diverticuli. Then as your fecal material, the hard stools just pack in here and pack in here and pack in here. Some collects now in this little opening that's not supposed to be there. Your walls of your colon are supposed to be smooth. So some fecal material collects here. Of course, if you go to the doctor and you're having these pains and this problem, they diagnose you with diverticulitis. The first thing they tell you is no strawberries, no blueberries, nothing with the little tiny seeds, no tomatoes, those seeds. See, those seeds are undigestible. And what happens is these little seeds now get caught here. And in the function of the colon drawing water in and out, it has this peristaltic motion. It's constantly relaxing and contracting, relaxing and contracting. So there's this constant motion going on. I grew up near the ocean in Savannah, Georgia, and we used to spend a lot of time at the beach as a young child. And I make the analogy that it's kind of like when I used to get sand right here in my bathing suit, and from my constant motion all day, I didn't just sit down on the beach like my mom did. I was running and playing and, doing all these things. And that sand rubbing, is that constant motion, just like those little seeds, it would cause an abrasion there. Well, that's now exactly what you get here. You get these little seeds causing an abrasion on the walls of your colon, on this little opening, but the problem, so you get this bleeding bowels. Then, because you've got this abrasion and you've got it packed with fecal material, what do you think is going to happen there? You get an infection. So you go to the doctor, he puts you on rounds of antibiotics to take care of the infection, and then laxatives to try to get your bowels moving and your colon thoroughly cleansed. But what I'm here to tell you is I have several people and have talked to them that have diverticulitis, and once they begin to mill their own wheat and make their own bread because of the very effective cleansing of the bran of your wheat, it eliminates this fecal material from being packed in here, and the walls of your colon are thoroughly cleansed. Unfortunately, it does not eliminate the diverticuli. So you could, have flare-ups from time to time. But if you eat the bread and have the walls of your colon thoroughly cleansed, you eliminate this situation from happening. You eliminate that fecal material getting hung up in that little opening. And in fact, the first meal we ever sold was to a man that had diverticulitis. The medical treatment for this problem, if it can't be controlled with antibiotics and laxatives, is to go in here and surgically remove a third or whatever portion of your colon that's needed to be removed. The first meal we ever sold was to a man that had had this surgery done, and now he had to talk about shortening your transit time. It really needs to be shortened then because you've got a shorter area, a shorter space. So he told me, I had baked him a loaf of bread just as a gift. It was really actually before we ever started selling meals. He came looking for me and said, that one loaf of bread, I've had the best week of my life. And that's when he began to tell me that he had diverticulitis and now had to purchase from the health food store the bran and all this fiber and eat all this stuff that would keep his colon thoroughly cleansed. And now, what else distresses me is that now to get the bran back in our food, we got to go to the health food store and pay a premium price for something that they're taking out now and selling to you again. That's just not right, is it? Cancer. 35% of the cancer in this country is caused by diet. Okay? Colon cancer is the most common cancer in this country. Yet countries that live on whole grains and food of the land do not have cancer, not like we do in this country. And what saddens me is food additives actually cause less than 1%. Now, I'm not an advocate of food additives. I wish they weren't there at all. And exposure to sun causes less than 3%. But what are you hearing so much about today? And what saddens me is that we go out now and we sit by the pool, or we go to the lake and we go swimming and we lather up with our sunscreen so that we don't get the cancer that from exposure to sun, which is less than 3%, and yet all the while we're eating and consuming the food that causes 35%. You know, where is our thinking and our logic here? We've lost touch with reality. Another interesting thing about cancer is that wheat and most of your grains actually absorb, see, in the colon, they absorb these carcinogens and toxins. They absorb them and take them right out of your body. Sorghum is a grain that's used commonly in other countries, and it is known to absorb as much as 50%. Also, years ago, there was I believe it was the early 1900s, I read in a history book, actually, that there was a biochemist that began to study why our country was seeing an increase in cancer. And he began to do some research. Do you know what his findings, his conclusion was after his extensive research, this biochemist? He found and he documented that the reason America was now seeing so much cancer is that we were no longer eating the grains and the foods that contained naturally vitamin B17. Vitamin B17 is a significant B vitamin for helping the body to fight cancer and cancer-causing agents that come into the body. This was his conclusion. Have you, another name for vitamin B17 is Laetrile. Have you ever heard of Laetrile? Laetrile is the controversial cancer treatment that was legislated illegal to be used in this country. And it is vitamin B17. It is found in your food. Yet they legislated it illegal because there was not enough research done on it to prove whether it was effective or harmful or whatever. Yet it's found in millet. It's found in almonds. It's found in some of your nuts and your other grains. Apricot pits. And I just recently, I don't know how you do apricot pits, but I just recently read somebody's testimony where they ate this powdered apricot pit. There's some tribe that they used to grind the pits of the apricots and eat this, and there was never a case of cancer in their village, in their tribe of people ever discovered. This was this biochemist's finding, but why are we not hearing about that? Why is our attention focused on drugs and medication instead of getting the body where it fights it on its own? I thought that was very enlightening. Also, I read a story in the Bible that would confirm to me about the grains actually absorbing the carcinogens. You may want to go read this story. It's in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 40. It's Elisha in the school of the prophets. And it says, it prefaced the story with there was a famine in the land. And it said one day this young prophet student was out on a walk and he found this gourd and he brought it back to the camp and he chopped it up and he put it in the pot of lentil stew. My guess is he was trying to spruce up this pot of lentil stew. Remember I said it began by saying there was a famine in the land. I imagine this pot of lentil stew had been their ration for several days now, or maybe years, I don't know. So anyway, he chopped up this gourd. So when they went down to sit down to eat that night, they sat down, they took a bite of stew, they put their hand to their throat. It says, do you know the story? It says, there's death in the pot. Elisha gets up, the prophet of the Lord, and it says he takes fine wheat flour and sprinkles over that pot of stew and says, now you can eat it. It's okay. Wow. When I read that, I went, wow. Absorbs poisons and toxins and carcinogens and takes them right out of your body. I am not at all taking away from the miraculous or the spiritual truth there, but you can only imagine what went through my mind. Wow, there it was, a classic example. I believe we need to start eating this way on a regular basis. I also want to encourage you with this. I believe there's death in our food pots. You look around, you go to the grocery store, see, what did that young prophet do? He's probably trying to spruce it up a little bit. That's exactly what we're doing now with our food. Because it's been so processed and so denatured that we now have to spruce it up with the colors and the flavors and all these artificial, and we've got to put all these chemicals in to make it last and to preserve it and all these things. There's death in our pot. But how encouraged would you be if I told you, okay, no more death in the pot. You know, you can't no longer eat or drink anything that has anything artificial in it. I mean, you can try. We do real well at home, but that means no eating out. I mean, no more. So how encouraged would you be? No more McDonald's, no more Hardee's. That might encourage you. But no more Shoney's, no more Applebee's, no more anything out there. No more nothing in the grocery store. You go walk out that door when you go, she's crazy. There's no way. You're right, there's no way, because we do eat out from time to time. We go to people's house that don't necessarily have the same convictions. We do all these things. But I'm here to tell you the encouraging thing is that there's death in our pot, but the key and the solution is not to go overboard. I doubt the prophet went out and got a gourd the next day. Okay, so what God enlightens you with that's death in the pot for you, don't bring it and put it in your pot in your house. But when you got to have it, I know that if I eat out today, that this morning I came and I had some bread, and I'm going to sprinkle what I ate yesterday with some fine, fresh milled flour, and it's going to cleanse it right out of my body, and it will be gone by this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Do you see what I'm saying? And I believe that's where we need to come to, and that God will honor that. Hiatal hernia is actually believed to be caused from pressure of pushing, trying to eliminate a hard stool. It causes the stomach to balloon up into your thorax, and then you get symptoms of indigestion. Heart disease. The number one problem in heart disease is caused from blockages. The number one thing that causes blockages in your veins and arteries is cholesterol. The American diet lacks all the nutrients to metabolize your fat and your cholesterol and break it down into usable particles. Let me just say this to you. Fat and cholesterol is necessary by your body. Oils is necessary by your body. Cholesterol is a component of every cell in your body. It's necessary. And if you deny your body cholesterol, it will make it. That is why so many people that go on these low-fat, low-cholesterol diets find that their cholesterol goes nowhere. Yet the first testimony that I ever got after I began to share from a lady, was on her third doctor. She had taken all their medications. She had done their diet, and her cholesterol had not lowered, not one bit. But in 1 month on eating our bread, her cholesterol dropped 85 points in 1 month. I wish I could tell you how many people tell me the same thing. And that's what sent me to that book, my books, that one testimony. I started digging, and do you know what I found? Every nutrient to metabolize cholesterol and fat is in wheat. Every nutrient, it's in the bread. Lecithin is a natural emulsifier that is needed by your body, but it's a nutrient. It's produced in your body if you give it all the nutrients that's necessary to produce it. But it is also found in any unrefined, did you hear the key word? Unrefined food with oil has lecithin in it. Isn't God so wise? He knew how to make the food. He knew what your body needed to metabolize that fat, so he put it there. Your eggs have lecithin in it. Your soybeans, your grains, all these things, they have lecithin. And this is perfectly able, if you will eat the whole grains and beans, you will eat these types of foods, it will keep your cholesterol in check. And it grieves me to no end to hear people say they've gone to the doctor, they've had triple bypass surgery, and the doctor has now told them that they need to make a lifestyle change. And that lifestyle change that he is telling them and advocating them is, next time you go to the fast food restaurant, instead of getting the quarter pounder with cheese that has this much fat, get the chicken sandwich that only has this much fat. Well, I am here to enlighten you today and tell you that that white flour bun that is wrapped around this much fat has no more nutrients in it to metabolize the fat than the white flour bun that is wrapped around this much fat. So go figure. I mean, what does it do if you're not taking in the nutrients to metabolize the fat and cholesterol? I was reading a book written in the 60s, and it wasn't about, she was a biochemist. It was strictly about what the nutrients do in your body. She didn't even know about milling your own wheat and making your own bread. But the whole paragraph on her chapter on reducing blood cholesterol blamed the taking away of the bran and germ and the production of white flour, and that's when we began to see cholesterol be a problem in this country. Diabetes. In a nutshell, What is happening in our country with diabetes, and I think this is probably the most common disease that I'm seeing today. It was not listed in the material that I read, but everywhere I go, mothers are coming up and saying, my child was just diagnosed with diabetes. In a nutshell, and then very simplistically, this is what happens. When you take in food, when you eat food, it's converted to sugar. Fiber helps absorb that sugar and causes it to go into your bloodstream more slowly. So your blood sugar levels rise very gradually. However, the American diet, which consists of food devoid of fiber and filled with lots of sugar, we see a very rapid rise in our blood sugar as soon as we've eaten something. So our blood sugar levels skyrocket. Well, the body that God designed so fearfully and wonderfully is stimulated to produce insulin to bring the blood sugar levels back down to a normal level. But because it's so high so quickly, it has risen so high so quickly, insulin is overproduced. So it's produced at massive levels and it drops the blood sugar down too quickly. So then we get weak and shaky, but then the body is stimulated to produce glucagon, another hormone that brings blood sugar levels back up to normal. So we get it back up to here, and unfortunately, Americans, it's about the time we get it here, it's time for our little mid-morning snack, or a Coke, or or a soft drink, or a candy bar, or a donut, or whatever we eat. Skyrockets our blood sugar, insulin is overproduced, our blood sugar levels bottom out, glucagon is produced and brings it back up to here. Then it's time for lunch. We fill it with all kinds of sugar-filled foods that are devoid of fiber. Our blood sugar levels skyrocket, insulin is produced, overproduced, our blood sugar levels bottom out, glucagon is produced, we bring it back up here. Next thing you know, we're time for a snack again. Another cup of coffee or soft drink, whatever, and this goes on all day long, day after day. It's kind of like the war between the flesh and the spirit. It just never ends till finally the pancreas gives up and wears out and can't produce the insulin to keep up with that problem. And then you've got blood sugar problems. Or there's a lot of hypoglycemics in this country today, and it's because their blood sugar levels bottom out, and then their body can't get them back up to here. Fiber will correct and can help eliminate that problem. I've done a lot of reading. There's a lot of research done on just putting whole grains and making it the mainstay of your diet, and many insulin-dependent diabetics were able to go off of insulin. Now, I'm not saying that will work across the board, that it will totally heal it, but it certainly would keep the problem from happening, and that's what's causing it to become so common and prevalent in this country today. I don't have time, I don't think, to go into the vitamin E information. I do want you to read that for yourself. But that was so fascinating to me, and the analogy there, I couldn't do it justice in this amount of time. Obesity, why are Americans fat? Why are we overweight? Why is this such a problem? Because the foods that we're eating are devoid of the fiber that God put there to fill you up. Therefore, now, because we don't have the belly filler in there, we can eat and overeat and eat and eat and just continue to eat until we've consumed massive amount of calories, and we're still not full. And then our food is devoid of nutrients that our body needs, so we're constantly craving and craving more and more things. In closing, I would like to say this. In some of the information I was reading about diabetes, I came across this testimony about a story of an island of Nauru who became wealthy overnight. And it said this little island had been living off the fruit of the land and the native land of their country, the native food of their country. But when they became wealthy, very quickly, they decided they wanted to live like the rich Americans. So they began to import their food, and so they could live like us. It said in just 2 short years, 40% of the adult population was diabetic. It said, though, this was what caught my eye. It would take another 30 to 40 years for them to see the heart disease, the high cholesterol, the diverticulitis, the cancer, and all the common problems that plague our nation today. I found a scripture in Proverbs, and it says, she looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. The bread of idleness was interesting. Idleness means to have no significant use or value. And so that bread of idleness for her is all the things in her life that has no significant use or value. But it says she doesn't eat this. She looks well. The words look well means to peer into the distance, to look out there, to lean forward, it says. And I think not worrying about tomorrow and fretting about the day, tomorrow has enough cares of its own, But this wise woman considers what's going on in her household today, the activities today, and has to peer out there and go, what future consequences or future blessings are today's activities going to produce out there? So she peers into the distance, and she has to look out there and consider what future consequences or future blessings is today's activities going to have. And here's the point I want to leave with you. I believe that God is raising up a righteous and godly generation in our children. I believe that's why we're homeschooling them. And I believe that He's coming to lead us to the promised land, to lead us into the blessings that He called us as a people to give us. And He's called us to be a blessing. And I believe we have to look out there and we have to consider our today's activities. And I know that as the children of Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years and only Joshua and Caleb were left to go into the promised land, that when God raised up Joshua to be a leader, Caleb came to him after 40 years of living on God's perfect provision, the manna, and he says to Caleb, I'm as ready today to fight as I was 40 years ago, and I'm ready to go take my land. And that's what I want my Ashley, Caleb, Joshua, David, Abigail, Lydia, and Olivia to be able to say to the Lord when He comes and says, I'm taking you to your land to give you the blessings that I promised you. I want my little godly generation to be able to stand before the Lord and say, I'm as ready today to fight. I'm not insulin dependent. I'm not dying of cancer. I don't have heart disease. I'm healthy, and I've got a strong immune system that can fight all the diseases that are going to be plaguing our nation as God's judgment falls upon us. And they can say, I'm ready, Lord. I'm ready to be a blessing. If God is willing to provide the manna, are you willing to gather it and prepare it? God bless you. Come by our table and eat some bread.